When I was little, I used to sit at the edge of my bed, waiting for someone to notice I was quiet. I'd listen to the sounds of the house, footsteps, doors closing, voices that never called my name. I didn't want toys or praise, I just wanted someone to look at me like I mattered. But no one did. So I learned early to stay small, to be easy, to not need too much. I didn't know it then, but that's how it begins, the slow, quiet lesson of being unloved. Maybe you remember something like that too, not the drama of cruelty or abuse, but the silence of absence. The dinner table where no one asked how your day was, the parent who loved your achievements but never your sadness. The feeling that love was a prize for good behavior, not something given freely. When you grow up like that, you don't stop wanting love, you just stop expecting it. You build your life around not being disappointed. You tell yourself you're fine, you're independent, you don't need anyone. But deep down, there's a quiet ache that never goes away. Psychologists call this childhood emotional neglect, a form of trauma that leaves no bruises, only beliefs. Beliefs like, I'm too much, I have to earn love, or if I stay invisible, I'll stay safe. According to research from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child, early emotional attunement, simple things like eye contact, affection, and soothing, shape the brain circuits that regulate empathy and self-worth. When those experiences are missing, the brain rewires for survival instead of connection. The amygdala, which detects threat, stays on high alert. Calm feels dangerous. Silence feels like rejection. Even as adults, our bodies remember what our minds try to forget. That's why peace can feel strange, why being loved can feel overwhelming. We chase success, approval, even perfection, not because we're ambitious, but because somewhere inside, we're still that child, hoping up a drawing, hoping someone will finally say, I'm proud of you. We call it drive or discipline, but it's really longing in disguise. We overthink every message, rehearse every conversation, and apologize for simply existing. The world calls us high dynamic. The truth is, we've just become experts at hiding our loneliness. But here's what I've learned, and maybe what you need to hear too. Not being loved as a child wasn't proof that you were unlovable. It was a reflection of someone else's wounds. Someone who couldn't give what they never received. The ache we carry isn't weakness, it's the evidence that we were built for love, that our hearts still remember what safety should feel like. And that's where healing begins, not by erasing the past, but by meeting the child within us and saying, you didn't do anything wrong. You just grew up around people who didn't know how to love you the way you needed. Sometimes we think not being loved means being mistreated, being yelled at, abandoned, or hurt. But most of us who grew up unloved never had a dramatic story. We had normal childhoods that looked fine from the outside. We had school photos with clean clothes, holiday dinners, and parents who said they were proud, but deep down we knew something was missing. What hurts the most isn't what happened, but what never did. The conversations that never came. The comfort that never arrived. The eyes that never met ours when we needed to be seen. That emptiness, over time, becomes the air we breathe. When you grow up in that kind of quiet, you learn how to adapt. You learn that needing too much makes people pull away, so you stop needing. You learn that emotions make others uncomfortable, so you hide them. You build a life that looks composed, responsible, successful, but inside you're starving for something you can't name. That's the secret tragedy of the unloved child. We don't just lose love. We lose the ability to believe we deserve it. We turn every act of kindness into suspicion, every moment of peace into tension, because when love once felt unpredictable, safety becomes hard to trust. Psychiatrist Dr. Bruce Perry, in his research on childhood trauma, describes how the brain learns through repetition. What fires together, wires together. In homes without consistent love, the neural pathways of comfort never fully develop. Instead, we wire for hypervigilance, constantly scanning for cues, reading every tone, every silence, every sigh. Our nervous system becomes an antenna for rejection, and even decades later, that antenna never really turns off. It's why a partner's delayed text feels like danger, why a friend's silence feels like betrayal, why we overthink what others forget. We call it sensitivity, but it's really a survival map drawn by a child who just wanted to feel safe. And that's what many of us still carry, a nervous system that doesn't know how to rest. We chase love the way someone chases warmth after years in the cold, but the moment we get close, we pull away. Because love feels foreign. Intimacy feels like exposure. The same warmth we crave also terrifies us. So we build walls and call them boundaries. We keep people close enough to feel wanted, but far enough to stay safe. We tell ourselves we're protecting our peace, but really, we're protecting our fear. The fear that if we show our true selves, the love we find will vanish again. Yet beneath all that fear, there's something else, something tender, still alive. Because even after years of silence, the heart doesn't forget what it was made for. It keeps reaching out in small, quiet ways, in how we comfort others, in how we listen too deeply, in how we forgive too easily. The unloved often become the most loving because we know what it's like to go without. But love, when it comes from scarcity, is exhausting. We give until there's nothing left, then wonder why no one gives back. The truth is, love can't fill us until we stop offering it as proof of our worth. That's what it means to stop waiting for someone else to prove we deserve affection and to start believing it ourselves. To recognize that what we once called strength was really loneliness in disguise, and what we called independence was fear dressed as control. It's not about tearing the walls down all at once, but about realizing that love doesn't have to be dangerous, that silence isn't always rejection, that peace can simply be. It's about finally looking at our reflection and saying, I'm allowed to want love. I'm allowed to need it. I just don't have to beg for it anymore. And that's where the next truth quietly unfolds. When we stop performing for love, we start to notice how long we've been mistaking survival for connection. There's something strange about how we survive. When love is missing, we don't stop needing it, we just learn to live without it. Our brains quietly rearrange themselves around that absence. We adapt, because that's what children do. We don't ask, why didn't they love me? We ask, what's wrong with me that they didn't? And from that question, a lifetime of self-doubt begins. As I look back, I realize how deeply that rewiring runs. The way I double-check every word before sending a message. The way silence makes my heart race. The way I expect disappointment even in calm moments. It's not drama, it's programming. When we grow up in homes where warmth was unpredictable, our nervous system starts to treat love like a potential threat. We want it, but we brace for it to hurt. So we stay half open, half guarded. We crave closeness, yet flinch when it arrives. It's exhausting, this dance between longing and fear, but for many of us, it's the only rhythm we've ever known. Neuroscience explains why. According to research from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, early emotional neglect alters the brain regions responsible for stress and safety. The amygdala, which detects danger, becomes overactive, constantly scanning for rejection. The hippocampus, which stores memory, becomes sensitive to cues of shame. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which helps us calm ourselves, weakens over time. In simple terms, our brains get stuck in survival mode. The body remembers the tension of waiting for love that never came. That's why, even years later, we may react to a partner's sigh or a friend's silence as if it were danger. We're not broken. We're remembering. And yet, that same adaptation that once kept us safe now keeps us distant. We think we're protecting ourselves, but what we're really doing is replaying the past again and again. We mistake vigilance for strength, control for safety. We tell ourselves we're just careful with people, but what we're really saying is, I still don't know what it feels like to be safe. Some of us turn our anxiety inward, trying to fix ourselves until we're lovable. Others turn it outward, chasing relationships that repeat the same wounds, trying to win the love we once missed. Both are different ways of saying, I'm still trying to rewrite the ending. Maybe it isn't about fixing what happened, maybe it's about understanding how we survived it. The same mind that learned to fear was only trying to keep us safe. It built walls, memorized silence, and called it control. Over time, those defenses became habits. The way we read every pause as rejection, every quiet moment as a threat. We didn't choose that, we adapted. And yet, there comes a point when survival starts to feel like a cage, when the old instincts that once protected us begin to hold us back. That's where the story shifts from simply surviving love's absence to finally questioning the cost of living without it. There's a quiet moment many of us remember, though, not with words, but with a feeling. It's that moment you realize no matter how hard you try, the warmth you crave isn't coming. Maybe it was a parent distracted at the dinner table, or the way your excitement was met with indifference. Maybe it was hearing you're too sensitive, or watching love being given easily to someone else. Whatever it was, that moment plants a seed, the idea that something about me must be wrong. And from that seed grows the belief that follows us for years. I'm not enough to be loved as I am. That belief doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up in the way we overthink every word before saying it, in how we replay conversations, wondering if we were too much or too quiet. It's in the way we chase approval without calling it that, through work, achievement, or caretaking. We become experts at earning love, but strangers to simply receiving it. And even when someone offers kindness freely, there's a part of us that resists. We smile, say thank you, but deep down, we're waiting for the catch, because love without effort feels foreign. Psychologists call this conditional worth, a pattern that begins in childhood when affection is tied to performance. Dr. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, wrote that many of us learn early that acceptance is conditional. When the child experiences conditional love, they come to view themselves as worthy only under certain conditions. That lesson doesn't fade. It becomes our emotional blueprint. We learn to shapeshift to be what others need, to say what keeps the peace, to hide what might disappoint. It's not dishonesty, it's survival. We were taught that authenticity was risky and invisibility was safer. As adults, this belief quietly directs everything. We take care of everyone else because we're terrified of being a burden. We overwork because rest feels undeserved. We minimize our pain so no one thinks we're difficult. And when love finally appears, we can't settle into it. We wait for rejection, the way some people wait for the rain, inevitable. We tell ourselves it's humility, but really, it's shame disguised as politeness. Deep down, we don't believe we're lovable. We believe we're tolerated. What's cruel about this wound is how convincing it feels. The unloved child doesn't grow up angry, they grow up guilty. They don't say, my parents failed me. They say, I must have failed them. That guilt becomes identity, shaping how we love, work, and even how we breathe. Studies in developmental psychology show that children who experience inconsistent affection develop what's called anxious, preoccupied attachment. They cling to others for reassurance, yet believe they're never truly wanted. That combination, hunger and doubt, becomes a lifelong pattern. We love deeply, but never peacefully. And yet, here's the paradox. The belief, I'm not enough, was never the truth. It was a conclusion drawn by a child trying to make sense of absence. When the people who were supposed to love us couldn't, our young minds assumed the flaw was ours, because that was safer than realizing love might not be guaranteed. In a way, that self-blame was an act of hope. If the problem is me, maybe I can fix it. But as adults, that same hope keeps us trapped forever, fixing what was never broken. Maybe the real work isn't about becoming more worthy, but about unlearning the idea that we were ever anything less. We weren't unlovable, we were unseen. We didn't need to earn love, we just needed it to feel safe. And even now, long after childhood has ended, those invisible rules still echo in how we speak, how we love, how we leave. We keep trying to prove what was never in doubt. But what happens when the proving stops? When the silence we once feared becomes the only place honest enough to face what's been missing all along? There's a quiet moment many of us remember, not with words, but with a feeling. It's that moment you realized, maybe too early, that love was something you had to earn. Maybe it was when you saw your parents' smile fade before you could finish your sentence, or when your joy was met with silence instead of warmth. That's when the seed was planted, the belief that love had rules, and you were always one step away from breaking them. As time went on, you were already one step away from breaking them. That belief doesn't shout, it seeps in quietly, shaping how we move through the world. We learn to measure our worth by usefulness, by how much we can give, by how little we can need. We call it being responsible. But beneath that composure lives a child still trying to be good enough to deserve a touch, a look, a you did well. And the cruelest part? We carry that same rule into adulthood, still performing for love that should have been unconditional. Psychologists call this conditional worth, a term first explored by Carl Rogers. He wrote, "When love depends on meeting certain conditions, the child comes to regard themselves as worthy only under those conditions." That belief doesn't vanish with age, it becomes the foundation of how we see ourselves. We grow into adults who apologize for existing too loudly. We overachieve not out of ambition, but out of fear that stillness might make us disappear. We confuse approval for affection and busyness for belonging. In time, this belief rewires not just how we think, but how we feel. The body, which once flinched from disapproval, now braces for it constantly. Every pause in conversation feels like judgment. Every unread message feels like rejection. It's not logic, it's memory. Our nervous system, shaped in the absence of steady love, still prepares for abandonment even in safe places. Research from the University of California shows that children raised in emotionally unpredictable environments develop heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, and lower regulation in areas tied to self-soothing. In simple terms, the body learns to expect danger even when love arrives. And so we keep running. We chase achievements, affection, anything that might silence the echo of not enough. We say yes when we want to say no. We stay where we feel unseen, hoping one more effort will make them notice. We build our lives around proving what never needed to be proven. But the more we chase, the further we drift from ourselves. Because love, when earned, never feels safe. It always feels borrowed. If we look closely, we'll see how this belief quietly governs everything. It's in how we shrink when praised or laugh off compliments we can't believe. It's in how we downplay pain so we don't seem dramatic. It's in how we keep giving long after we're empty. This is the legacy of the unloved child. We learn to survive by abandoning ourselves first. But here's the truth that changes everything, the one that took me years to understand. That belief, I'm not enough, was never the truth. It was a misunderstanding born in the silence of unmet love. When the people who were supposed to make us feel safe couldn't, our young minds turned that absence inward. We decided the problem must be us, because believing otherwise was too unbearable. And so we carried that burden like proof, mistaking pain for evidence of unworthiness. The shift begins when we start questioning the story we were told. What if the absence of love said nothing about our worth and everything about their capacity? What if not being loved wasn't a reflection of who we were, but of what they couldn't give? Then we would stop seeing ourselves through the eyes of those who never really saw us. The sentence, "I'm not enough," would stop being a verdict and start becoming a question, one that quietly reveals the truth we've forgotten but always deserved to know. We were always worthy. We just grew up believing we weren't. And from that realization, a deeper understanding unfolds how much of our lives have been shaped not by what was missing, but by how carefully we learned to hide that emptiness. There's a kind of grief that has no funeral, no tears at the bedside, no condolences from friends. It's the quiet mourning of a childhood that looked fine on the outside, but felt empty on the inside. The grief of realizing you grew up surrounded by people, yet still felt alone. For a long time, I didn't even know that's what I was carrying. I just called it restlessness, or sadness, or nothing at all. But beneath all the labels, it was grief. The sorrow of never being seen, never being comforted, never being known for who I really was. This kind of mourning is confusing because nothing dramatic happened. There's no moment to point to, no single wound to heal. We grieve what never existed, the embrace we needed, the safety we should have felt, the voice that should have said, "You matter." It's hard to name what you never had, and harder still to grieve it, because society tells us we should be grateful that our lives looked stable, so we minimize it. We say, it wasn't that bad, while our bodies hold the evidence that it was. The ache that shows up when someone hugs us too long, the lump in our throat when someone says, "I love you," the instinct to pull away when someone tries to stay. Dr. Gabor Mate once wrote, "Children don't get traumatized because they are hurt. They get traumatized because they are alone with their hurt." That's what emotional neglect does. It isolates us inside our own skin. When no one helps us name our feelings, we learn to hide them to protect others from our pain. And over time, we become strangers to ourselves. We don't just lose love, we lose the ability to feel safe inside our own hearts. That's why, years later, something as simple as kindness can make us cry, not because it hurts, but because it reminds us of what we missed. This grief doesn't rage, it doesn't scream, it waits. It hides in the spaces we fill with work, with caretaking, with noise. It's the silence we feel when the day is over and the house is still. The mind says, "You're fine," but the body whispers, "You're lonely." And that loneliness isn't about others. It's about the parts of us that were left behind. The child who stopped asking for help, the teenager who learned to stay quiet, the adult who carries both, still pretending not to care. Leaving the childhood we never had isn't about blaming anyone. It's about acknowledging the truth. It's about saying, yes, I missed something important, and yes, it mattered. Because what we never mourn stays alive in us. The uncried tears become tension. The unspoken words become distance. The unacknowledged pain becomes patterns. When we finally let ourselves grieve, not with bitterness, but with tenderness, something begins to shift. The grief doesn't disappear, but it softens. It stops being a wound and becomes a witness, proof that we once needed love, and that need was never wrong. That's the quiet power of this kind of grief. It doesn't destroy us, it humanizes us. It reminds us that longing itself is proof of life. When we allow ourselves to feel it fully, gently, without turning away, something inside begins to shift. Because grief, when faced with honesty, isn't the end of love. It's what reveals how deeply we were made for it. And once we understand that, we begin to see what comes next. How the pain we carried for years can become the very lens through which we start to understand love itself. There comes a point in every healing journey when the story stops being about them and starts being about us. For a long time, I thought healing meant getting over it, closing the door, moving on, pretending I was stronger than my past. But healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. It's realizing that what once broke you was never proof of your weakness, but evidence of how deeply you needed connection. And maybe that's the first turning point, when we stop asking, why didn't they love me? And start asking, what did that teach me about love, and how can I unlearn it? Awareness is the light that begins to crack through the old walls. It's uncomfortable at first, because the moment we see clearly, we also feel the weight of what we lost, the love that never came, the safety that never arrived. But inside that discomfort is freedom. We finally understand that our reactions aren't madness, they're memory. The way we panic at silence, the way we over-explain ourselves, the way peace feels suspicious. These aren't personality flaws. They're echoes of a nervous system that learned to equate love with uncertainty. And when we recognize that, we can stop blaming ourselves for the ways we survived. Neuroscientists call this process repatterning, the slow rewiring of neural pathways that once encoded fear. Every moment of safety, every act of self-kindness, every time we soothe ourselves instead of criticizing, we teach the brain a new story. Dr. Christine Neff, a pioneer in self-compassion research, explains it simply. Self-compassion activates the same care system that is triggered when a parent comforts a child. In other words, when we practice gentleness toward ourselves, we're literally giving our bodies the love they once missed. It's not abstract, it's biological. The more we respond to our pain with warmth instead of shame, the more our nervous system learns that it's finally safe to rest. I think that's the hardest part for many of us, learning to treat ourselves the way no one ever did, to hold our own sadness without trying to fix it, to speak kindly to the voice that still says, "You're not enough," to stop performing calmness and start allowing truth. For those of us who grew up being the caretakers, the peacemakers, the ones who made everything fine, turning that compassion inward feels unnatural. We worry it's selfish, but it's not. It's survival of a different kind, not the desperate kind that hides, but the conscious kind that chooses to stay. Awareness opens the door, but compassion is what lets us walk through it. Because awareness without kindness only becomes another way to judge ourselves. We can't think our way out of pain, we have to tend to it. So healing isn't a breakthrough moment, it's thousands of small ones. It's catching ourselves mid-criticism and whispering, "It's okay." It's letting silence feel like peace instead of punishment. It's remembering that strength isn't pretending you're fine. It's being gentle with the parts of you that still aren't. And maybe this is where everything starts to change. When we finally understand that the love we've been chasing doesn't need to come from someone else. It can start here, in this breath, in this body, in this quiet. The same love we once begged for can now be something we learn to give, not as a replacement for the past, but as a rebellion against it. Because when we learn to meet our pain with compassion, the story of our lives shifts. We stop being the child who wasn't loved and start becoming the adult who knows how to love, beginning with ourselves. There's a moment in every healing story when pain begins to speak a different language. It no longer shouts, "Look what they did to me," but whispers, "Look what I've learned to carry." That shift doesn't erase what happened, it transforms it. The wound doesn't vanish, it becomes a doorway. And through that doorway, we begin to see what suffering, as cruel as it once was, has quietly been shaping within us all along. Depth, sensitivity, empathy, the very qualities that make us human in the most extraordinary way. For a long time, I wanted to be free from my past. I thought healing meant deleting it, editing it out of the story. But now I understand that the past isn't something to escape, it's something to reclaim. The same experiences that once silenced us often become the reason we can finally listen to others and to ourselves. Those who've known emotional absence tend to develop an exquisite sensitivity to presence. We notice the pauses in someone's voice, the tremble behind their smile, the quiet ache in their eyes, because we've lived inside those silences before. What once felt like a curse becomes a kind of emotional radar, an intuition honed in the dark. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, once wrote, "In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. That meaning isn't about romanticizing pain, it's about acknowledging the transformation that can emerge from it." Neuroscience now supports this idea. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that people who process emotional wounds with awareness and compassion often experience higher levels of empathy, creativity, and emotional intelligence. In other words, when we stop running from our pain and begin to understand it, our nervous system reorganizes, not only around survival, but around connection. The brain rewires itself toward love. This doesn't mean the wound was necessary, it means it no longer has the final word. The child who once felt invisible can grow into an adult who makes others feel seen. The one who was never heard becomes someone who listens with their whole being. The person who once begged for affection learns how to give it freely, not from fear, but from understanding. What we lost doesn't have to define us. What we create from that loss can, because the truth is, every scar tells a story not just of pain, but of endurance. And endurance, when softened by compassion, becomes wisdom. But wisdom asks something of us too, that we stop clinging to the narrative of victimhood, that we honor our suffering without letting it become our identity, that we understand, yes, it happened, and yes, it hurt, but we are more than the sum of our wounds. Healing doesn't make the pain disappear, it makes room for something else beside it. Gratitude, curiosity, even love. Love not as a prize we earn, but as a way of being. Love that begins where pain once lived, radiating outward in quiet, steady waves. And maybe that's the true gift within the wound, that after everything, we are still capable of love, that the heart, even after being broken, keeps choosing to open. We learn that our pain doesn't disqualify us from joy, it prepares us for it. The very tenderness that once made us vulnerable is what now allows us to connect, to comfort, to understand. And in that, the tragedy of not being loved as a child begins to transform, not into a fairy tale ending, but into something even more powerful. The profound, grounded knowing that we can become the love we needed all along. There comes a quiet moment in the healing journey, not dramatic, not loud, when you finally stop running. You stop chasing approval, stop rehearsing your worth, stop trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional. The noise fades, and in that stillness, you realize something profound. You've been searching not for a person, but for a place inside yourself that feels like home. Healing is not about erasing the past, it's about coming back to yourself. The adult you've become finally turns toward the child you once were, the one who waited by the door, who tried so hard to be good enough, who mistook silence for safety and meets them not with judgment, but with tenderness. You kneel down, look into their tired eyes and whisper, "You were never unworthy. You just were never truly seen." In that moment, something shifts. The ache doesn't vanish, but it softens. The nervous system that once flinched at every sign of rejection begins to relax. The body, which learned to brace for love's absence, starts to trust again. You begin to realize that safety was never meant to come from being perfect. It comes from being present. You learn to reparent yourself, to give patience where there was once pressure, to offer comfort where there was once criticism, to stay when once you would have turned away. This is where the story changes. The tragedy of not being loved as a child is real. Its shadow lingers, its echoes remain, but it does not define your life. It is not the end of your story. Healing begins the moment you stop proving your worth and start remembering that you have always been enough. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not a grand revelation, but a quiet return. A return to yourself. A return to the child who still lives within you, waiting not for perfection, but for presence. So if you see yourself in these words, if something inside you still aches to be seen, stay a while. We'll keep walking this road together, step by step, with gentleness, with truth, with hope, because you were never unworthy. You were simply waiting to be found. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering the parts of you that were never lost. The child who once waited to be loved is still here, still worthy, still enough. So take a breath, be gentle with yourself. You've already begun the work just by listening. And if these words felt like home, stay with us. We'll keep walking this path together, one quiet, honest step at a time.